No sound, Bob. No sound.
Hold on.
There we go. Got you now.
Right.
Yep.
You're on, Gavin. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Gavin. Sorry about the reverb. I'll try and fix it as we go along. I live in New Zealand, way down the bottom of the world, somewhere close to Australia. So hello to everybody in the chat. Thank you to Dharmakaya for agreeing to debate this topic. This is going to make a nice change from the usual does God exist or did the resurrection happen type debates. And thanks to Bob. It's a tough ask for Bob because it's midnight where he is in the UK, sorry. So thank you, Bob. And I just hand it over to my learned opponent.
Go on, Dharma, introduce yourself. Hello. Oh no. This is...
Can you hear me, Dharmakaya?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I can hear you fine.
You want me to introduce?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I am pretty much an unknown person, and I'm happy that I'm unknown fairly. I go on YouTube. I've been on YouTube since YouTube began. I'm also on Discord and Clubhouse. I'm not on those as recently, but I have degrees in philosophy, political philosophy, economics, international relations. I'm interested in debating really anything. Gavin wanted to debate this topic, so I just decided to debate it, and I have nothing better to do, and so it's fine. But I'm free to debate really anything, and I enjoy discussions with different people. But I'm just basically nobody, and I'm happy that I am because I don't like the limelight.
All right.
Okay, who's going to begin? You're taking the affirmative, are you, Gavin?
Yeah, normally the affirmative always goes first.
Okay. If you're happy with that, Dharma, then...
Yeah. So just before we start, Dharmakaya, I just need to find out. I'm taking the affirmative position because I believe that the God of the Bible does exist. Is it your belief that the God of the Bible does exist or does not exist?
Well, that's not the topic of the debate, but if we want to talk about that first, we can.
Well, can you tell me now what your position is?
Well, I'm just debating the topic, which is the biblical God properly basic, and that's what I was going to debate. But if you're asking me about whether God exists, are you talking about the biblical God or in particular?
Yeah. The God of the Bible.
No, I think the biblical God doesn't exist, and I would also say that I think that the notion of God existing is incoherent.
That's fine. That's fine.
I don't think that the notion of God is even possible.
That's fine.
That's my view.
Okay, cool. So shall I start, Bob?
10 minutes. Soon as you
Yeah.
word.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, so I'll set my timer. All right, so tonight's debate is belief in the biblical God properly basic? What this debate is not about is whether the biblical God exists or not. However, my opponent is under a severe handicap right from the beginning because my opponent does not believe God exists. And this is a negative existential proposition. It's a proposition that is impossible to prove or verify. So the question of whether belief in God is a properly basic belief requires fulfillment of the following criteria. Is the belief justified, rational, warranted, and are your cognitive faculties unimpaired? Justification and internal rationality are easily dealt with. First justification taken deontologically in terms of intellectual rights and obligations is no more problematic than that of the case of theism. Problematic, sorry, not problematic. Clearly, any person could be justified in accepting these and other Christian beliefs, and would be so justified if, after careful and non-culpable reflection and investigation into the alleged objections and alleged defeaters, still found these beliefs to be wholly compelling. They could not be blamed for believing what strongly seems, after an extensive investigation, to be the justified truth of the biblical God. The same goes for internal rationality, which is a matter of proper function of cognitive processes downstream from experience. These beliefs seem to me to be clearly true. Theists find them wholly convincing, just as they do about their beliefs about other individuals' minds and the external world at large. And they remain convincing even after all the apparent objections the believer encounters. Christians have a powerful inclination to believe these things, and hence have strong doxastic, it's a hard word, doxastic evidence for them. There also needs to be no cognitive malfunction, glitch, or impediment into one's cognitive processing, one's cognitive processing, for their belief to be internally rational. But these observations probably won't quiet the skeptics, though, for even if Christian believers are justified and internally rational in their beliefs, they might still be externally irrational and thus wholly without warrant. After all, the beliefs of a madman or the victim of a Cartesian evil demon can be both justified and internally rational. So then what about external rationality and warrant? Well, a belief is externally rational if it is produced by cognitive faculties that are functioning properly and successfully aimed at truth, i.e. aimed at the production of a true belief, as opposed to, for example, just being the product of wish fulfillment or some type of cognitive malfunction. Now, warrant, the property enough of which distinguishes knowledge from mere true belief, is a property or quantity had by a belief, and only if that belief, and only if that belief is produced by cognitive faculties functioning properly in a congenial epistemic environment, according to a design plan successfully aimed at truth. Because rationality, in the sense of proper function of rational powers, is included in warrant. The real question here is whether Christian belief does or can have warrant. Here's the good news. According to the extended Aquinas-Calvin model, and I'll just say A/C for short, Christian belief does indeed have warrant. In essence, the AC model goes like this. First, God created us humans in his own image. This centrally involved our resembling God in being persons, that is, beings with intellect, logic, and will. Like God, we are the sort of beings who have beliefs and understandings. We have intellect. We also have will. However, we also resemble God in having affections, loves and hates, likes and dislikes, informing aims and intentions, and being able to act in accomplishing these aims and intentions. We can call this the broad image, in air quotes, broad image of God. But human beings, as originally created, also displayed a narrow image. They had extensive and intimate knowledge of God and sound affections, including gratitude for God's goodness. They loved and hated what was lovable and hateful. But above all, they knew and they loved God. Part of this image was generated by what Calvin postulated as the sensus divinitatis. Because of the fall, we don't see God clearly now in the same natural and unproblematic way in which we know each other and the world around us. Still further, sin induces in us a type of resistance to the influence of the Holy Spirit. But it's not all bad news, because God himself has provided a remedy for sin, a means of salvation and restoration to his favour and fellowship. This remedy is made available in the life-atoning suffering and death and resurrection of his divine Son, Jesus Christ. Salvation involves, among other things, rebirth and a renewing of our minds, and not conforming to the patterns of this world. A process that involves restoration and repair of the image of God in us. So God needed a way to inform human beings of the salvation he has graciously made available, and he chose to do so in the following way. First, there is Scripture, the Bible, a collection of writings by human authors, but specifically inspired by God in such a way that he can be said to be its principal author. Second, he has sent the Holy Spirit. The principal work of the Holy Spirit, a principal work of the Holy Spirit, not the only work, a principal work of the Holy Spirit with respect to us humans is the ongoing production of the gift of faith, that firm and certain knowledge of God's benevolence towards us, founded upon the truth of the freely given promise in Christ, both revealed to our minds and sealed metaphorically on our hearts through the Spirit. By virtue of the internal instigation of the Holy Spirit, we come to see the truth of the central Christian affirmations. Additionally, the Holy Spirit illuminates to us the truth of the narrative of the Christian gospel as set forth in Scripture. The internal invitation of the Holy Spirit is therefore a source of belief, a cognitive process that produces in us a properly basic belief in the Christian narrative. Still further, according to the AC model, the beliefs produced in us via the Spirit meet the conditions necessary and sufficient for warrant. They are produced by our cognitive processes functioning properly in accord with their design plan in an appropriate epistemic environment successfully aimed at truth. And if they are held with sufficient firmness, these beliefs qualify as knowledge. So as such, the Christian theist soon comes to know that Jesus Christ is the meta-hero that's at the very foundation of Western civilization. His archetypal mode of being is truth, and that has been his archetypal mode of being is truth, capital T, and that has been the fundamental ideal of our society for the past 2,000 years. So if my learned opponent thinks that belief in the God of the Bible is not a properly basic belief, he must tear down my argument and offer a more probable explanation for why this is not the case. Given what I've seen from atheist philosophers like Graham Oppy, Alex Malpass, Jürgen Habermas, and Thomas Nagel, I will contend that this cannot be done given the facts that I have just laid out. And I'll yield my time there with a minute to spare. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, sounds good.
When you're ready, Dharmakaya, you've got 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with what he said in that long opening statement. He said, first he asked me a question about my doxastic stance about God. I want to point out that doxastic stances are not relevant to the actual truth of a proposition. So, I mean, I can believe, and I do believe, that science can yield truth values. That does not mean that it does. My belief about science yielding truth values could have nothing to do with whether it actually does or not. It's possible skepticism is true and that science doesn't yield any truth values. So my doxastic stance is not relevant to this debate. That's the first thing. Second thing is the question of warrant. When talking about properly basic beliefs don't necessarily have to do with whether they're warranted or not. Properly basic beliefs are actually far more foundational and fundamental, which I will get into in a second. So that's not necessarily the reason why we hold properly basic beliefs. For example, you can be warranted in believing the Earth is flat or that Ptolemaic astronomy is true. You could be warranted in believing miasma theory, that gas causes disease, or bloodletting theory, that you can take blood out of someone and heal them. But that doesn't mean that that view is actually true. So warrant is not in and of itself what a properly basic belief consists of. In the second place, in the final place, what he said was about the Christian tradition being a 2,000-year tradition and the staple of our society and civilization. That is true, but that is an appeal to tradition. Just because something is something which has held our society intact and our civilization intact for 2,000 years, which I don't deny, I think that's absolutely true, doesn't mean that number one, that is a factual claim about how reality is fundamentally. In other words, just because people have had this tradition that Jesus has rose from the dead for 2,000 years doesn't mean Jesus actually did rise from the dead. And then the second point is a normative point where, okay, fine, Christianity has held sway in civilization for 2,000 years. That doesn't mean it ought to. You could easily just make a case, well, Christianity ought not to exist, even though it's held sway. So those are not really relevant to this debate. Now I'll go over my main thesis, which is the topic of this debate, which is the biblical God properly basic? In order to do this, you have to define what the biblical God is. For the sake of this debate, since the majority of people who consider themselves followers of the biblical God are Christians, I'm going to assume that we mean Jesus by this, even though there are people who follow the biblical God and claim that Jesus is not God, such as Jews, for example. So assuming that Jesus is this person, as the Bible itself says in John 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, word was with God, word was God, Hebrews 1, verse 4, that he holds all things by the might of his power, Titus 2, verse 13, that we look forward to the great coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and Jude 5, where it says Jesus led the people out of Egypt. Nicene Creed says Jesus is the true God of true God. Chalcedon says Jesus is fully God. So I'm assuming that's what we mean by the God of the Bible, because the Bible says it several times that Jesus is this God. So I'm going to assume that that's what we mean. Going by what the definition of God is, then we have to turn to what is properly basic. A properly basic belief has to do with what is a basal foundational belief that is incorrigible and cannot be denied. That is how it's been defined in philosophy. I personally am not a foundationalist, but it doesn't matter, because foundationalism has a definition. Whether you're a foundationalist or not, you have to follow what the definition is. A foundational belief is something that is axiomatic, that is properly basic, that cannot be denied. To deny it would be something absurd. It's something that is so foundational you can't get any further. That's why Descartes is famous for his cogito ergo sum, that I think therefore I am. Descartes doubted, this is his idea, that he doubted everything that could be doubted and came to the conclusion the only thing he could not doubt was that he existed. So that was his foundational belief. That was his properly basic belief. Okay, so belief itself isn't properly basic. This is where I was getting at earlier. You can be warranted in believing a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that that belief is properly basic. Properly basic beliefs are a specific subset of a belief. They aren't all beliefs. All beliefs by their nature are not necessarily properly basic, only a specific kind of beliefs. Beliefs that are incorrigible, undeniable, foundational beliefs that cannot be doubted. Those are what properly basic beliefs are. So let's talk about whether Christianity is, or the belief in Christianity is properly basic. Well, according to the Bible and Christianity, Jesus was a relatively unknown figure in history, and the evidence of that is the fact that there's not a single physical description of Jesus anywhere. Not in the Gospels, not in the Epistles, not in the extra-biblical accounts. We don't know what Jesus looked like until centuries later, where people started writing about him, depicting images of him. So that shows that even if he existed, which I'm not going to deny in this debate or debate this, I'm just going to assume that he did, and that the Gospels are relatively accurate for the sake of debate. Even if he did that, we still have a very relatively unknown figure who performed, according to the Christian Bible, various miracles, rose from the dead, and according to the Christian Bible, was the Messiah and was a God, if not the God. That's a debate among Christians historically, how Jesus is divine, but I'm not going to get into that. The belief that a relatively unknown human being was a God, a Messiah, and a man who came back from the dead is not an incorrigible, undeniable foundational belief. That's simply not the definition of what a properly basic belief is. It just fits. It might be a belief, that's fine, but it sits outside of the boundaries of what constitutes properly basic. To the early Christians, in fact, this was not necessarily even accepted, let alone as properly basic. So you can see, for example, Ebionites, Nazarenes, Gnostics, Marcionites, Adoptionists, Arians. There are plenty of other groups. You can read Lost Christianities by Bart Ehrman, Found Christianities by David Litwa, Heresy and Orthodoxy and Early Christianities by Walter Bauer, Jesus Interrupted, Ehrman, Several verses in the Bible, for example, 2 Peter 1 verse 16 talks about that this is responding to people who are saying that Christianity was a cleverly devised myth. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul actually never says in Greek, he never says explicitly that Jesus came back to life. That would be the word anaviosis in Greek. He actually just says he awoke, agero. Now we can debate whether that actually means he rose from the dead, but I'm not going to debate that here. That's a separate debate, and there are plenty of debates that have been on that. For example, Dr. Richard Carey debated Mark Lacona on the topic. Dennis McDonald debated Mike Lacona. There are articles like, does 1 Corinthians 15 teach a physical spiritual resurrection? David Friedman. Plenty of other places you can debate that. I'm not going to debate that here. I'm just saying that it's at least disputed. And so if it's disputed, it's not a properly basic belief. Let alone other people who have thought likewise. So you have Celsus, for example, Porphyry, Thomas Paine, who is the great founder, great founding father of this country, who I admire greatly, and others who have not considered this a properly basic belief. Again, a properly basic belief is incorrigible, undeniable. If you can deny it, it's not properly basic. And plenty of people can easily deny that a person who lived in history at some point was a god. That's an easily deniable belief. So it's not properly basic by that definition. If it was the case that a belief that a human being was a god, a messiah, a man who rose from the dead, if that in fact were the case, that was a properly basic belief, then it would follow that Sabbatai, Osiris worshippers, Dionysus worshippers, followers of Pythagoras, Plato, Empedocles, Apollonius of Tyana, and many, many others, who also believed that their gods, messiahs, and savior figures existed, they'd be justified in believing those are properly basic as well. So that means if we let the Christian belief be properly basic, we have to allow all beliefs to be properly basic, and that's a reductio. It cannot work that way. So basically, in conclusion, premise 1, properly basic beliefs are incorrigible, undeniable foundational beliefs. That's the definition of properly basic analytically. Premise 2, I don't think any Christian would deny this. It's another analytic proposition, which is that Jesus is the biblical God. Premise 3, belief in Jesus, a Messiah, God, miracle worker, and death defier is not undeniable nor incorrigible, and was denied in question historically. People might be able to deny that premise. I don't think they will be able to. Premise 4, if we assume that God is properly basic, then any of the aforementioned God's cults would also be properly basic, which is absurd. So, and I think that just reduces to absurdity. That's a reductio. So, conclusion: belief in the biblical God is not properly basic. So that is my position on properly basic beliefs vis-a-vis the biblical.
Okay, you got about a minute left, minute and 20 seconds, Dharma.
No, we can do a cross exam or something. Move to something more productive.
What, 5 minutes each or 2 minutes? Or
no, it's up to 8 minutes, either rebuttal or cross examination. So shall I go first, Bob?
8 minutes, you say?
No more than 8 minutes.
Okay. Go on then, Gavin, if you want to.
All right, I'll just set my timer. Okay, thanks for that, Dharmakaya. Okay, so there's a few problems with what you were saying, particularly around the definition of a properly basic belief. Now, there is contention surrounding what accounts for a properly basic belief, particularly in terms of foundationalism. And you assert that for a belief to be properly basic, that belief needs to be incorrigible and undeniable, correct?
That's how many philosophers have used it. You could always debate, there's always debates in philosophy, but that's how, for example, Descartes, who's one of the well-known foundationalists, understood it, and that's how many people have understood it.
Well, there's also many people that reject foundationalism.
Oh yeah, I'm one of those people.
Oh sure, yeah. I gave a list of what qualities a properly basic belief would need, and a properly basic belief that is not based in foundationalism would need to be justified, rational, warranted, and a person's cognitive faculties would need to be fine and good working order. They wouldn't need to be influenced by, drugs or alcohol or any kind of injury to the brain. So, yeah, we need to be clear that there is contention. There is contention amongst what does actually constitute a properly basic belief. Now, you also said warrant is not relative to a properly basic belief. And I
want to be clear what I'm saying. I'm
Sorry?
not saying that warrant is itself not necessary for a properly basic belief. I'm just saying that warrant isn't sufficient. You can have warrant for false beliefs. Warrant is not sufficient in and of itself for a properly basic belief.
True. And that's why I said for a belief in the biblical God to be a properly basic belief, it needs to be warranted, rational, and justified, and your cognitive faculties need to be in good working order. So, why did you kind of labour on warrant not being the only thing needed for a properly basic belief?
Yeah, that seemed to be your push. Maybe I was just misreading it. There's a lot you said, so your push seemed to be basically that warrant was very central to what makes your properly basic belief justified, and I was just saying that that's what it sounded like. You're pushing your opening statement. Maybe I just read you wrong, but it seemed like that was a huge emphasis on what you were saying earlier.
Well, warrant is really important to forming a properly basic belief, but it's not the only thing. So now you also talked about, you said that your doxastic stance has nothing to do with the topic. No, we're not debating whether God exists or not, but the fact that you do not believe God exists, that will cause a bias in your argument. And as I've already said, this belief of yours is a nothing burger because it's a negative existential proposition. It can't be proven, and it's impossible to prove or verify. There are negative existential propositions.
I disagree with that, but we could debate that.
You'll get your chance. You'll get your chance to speak. There are negative existential propositions that can be proven. For instance, the statement, "I am not black." You can see that I'm a white man. So that's a negative existential proposition that's easy to prove. But saying God does not exist is an impossibility for the person who holds that belief to prove. So therefore, it's an impossible proposition to prove or verify. If you think it is, if you think you can prove or explain how God does not exist, then I'd love to hear it in the open discussion. Okay. It seemed that you were dubious about whether Jesus existed, but for the sake of the discussion or sake of the debate, you would just accept that he did exist. Is this right?
Yeah, no, I'm probably a stronger mythicist than Richard Carrier is. So, but that's not part of this debate. So.
Wow. Actually, it kind of is, because Jesus is God, right?
I assumed it for the sake of debate. So I read through my opening statement rather quick, but in the beginning I did cite verses and say, like, for the sake of argument, according to the Bible, this is what it says. I mentioned John 1, Hebrews 4, Titus 2. So yeah. I'm okay with assuming that the Bible does say. So that's the thing. I mean, we could have debated whether or not Jesus was God, because Jews don't believe that. I mean, I could have had that be a major thing. I just decided to accept for the sake of argument that the Bible means Jesus is God. I didn't want to get into that debate.
Okay. But you did mention that in the Bible there's no description of how Jesus looked, like how he looked physically from the outside.
Well, almost anywhere. There's hardly one.
This was a reason that led you to doubt the existence of Christ, which is kind of weak, really.
I don't know if that's my main reason, but again, that's a huge thing. I don't know.
This is not time. This is not time for your opinions. This is my time. You get to question me next. Okay. Now, you also said you doubted if the early Christians had a properly basic belief in Jesus. Is that right?
No. My argument was not that. My argument was that they didn't have a properly basic belief in the way that Christians today have that. So, what I mean is their conception of Jesus. It's not that they didn't believe in Jesus. They just had a very different conception of him. Many Christians did. So that means that the conception that you hold wouldn't be
So all
properly basic.
all you're doing is playing with words. Now,
1 minute.
the Christians in the first century, they saw Jesus with their own eyes. They ate with him. They saw him walk through walls. So I would think that the early Christians in the first century had an extremely serious, properly basic belief in Christ because they saw him with their own eyes. You also mentioned, sorry, Bob, did you say something?
We said 1 minute.
Oh, okay, 1 minute. Okay, that's good. Last thing, you mentioned something. Yeah, okay. You mentioned something about 1 Corinthians 15. And was it something about when it was written?
No, I'm saying that the Greek word in that passage, because that's the passage in 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about, according to the scriptures, Jesus died and rose and appeared to all these people, the 500, the 12, James and Peter, John, and lastly me, and so on. So I was just saying that the words, whenever Paul uses the word to resurrect, it's not the word to come back to life like in Greek, anaviosis, like it usually used to come back to life. He uses a very vague word for resurrect. And I'm just saying that there's debates on what that means. And so if there's debates on what that means, then it's not clear that that view would be properly basic, because it can't be debated if it's properly basic.
Dharma, it's your 8 minutes now if you want to start.
Yeah, is this?
Yeah, right.
Am I asking questions?
You can do what you like. You can do rebuttals,
okay.
Or you can do the cross-examine. It's up to you. It's totally up to you.
You know, a lot of what you've said so far seems to be predicated on your own beliefs, which is understandable because that's what this debate is about. It's about whether your doxastic stance is properly basic, which is totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I want to approach this from a very different perspective because this is just how I approach things. I'm less interested in what's rational and what is believed by people than what is actually evidenced. So I'm a strong David Hume. I'm a strong fan of David Hume. David Hume was critical not only of traditional religion, which he was. He wrote a book on it called The Dialogues of Natural Religion, but he was also critical of reason. He was an empiricist. He rejected strongly the rationalist position. He thought that reason is and ought only be a slave to the passions. He believed reason was very strongly influenced by our emotions and by various things which are not rational. So reason is not a good guide because it's guided by all these irrational appetites of the human psychology. And so I'm very interested in what the evidence shows because that is at least more neutral to my own reason faculties, which have been and often are incorrect. And it's not just mine that are incorrect. We've had thousands of years of people believing wrong things for good reasons. It's not like they had bad reasons. And so I'm more interested in what the evidence shows. And when I look at evidence for the existence of God or for Jesus, I don't personally find that. And a properly basic belief has to be something which is axiomatic, that is incorrigible, according to most people who understand foundationalism, but we can get into that also. Like I said, I'm not a foundationalist. I would attack foundationalism directly. So for that discussion, that would require a totally different debate as to whether foundationalism are true or not. But no, I mean, I'm interested in what the evidence shows. And that's how I'm steering this debate, more so than whether a belief can be properly basic. So let me say talk about a properly basic belief that I think would be justified, and like I'd be willing to give this to you totally, which is belief in God, not a belief in a particular God, which is what this debate is about, but belief in God in general. So I think belief in a God that does what the contingency argument argues that he does do, which is he secures as the necessary being all these contingent facts of the world that are dependent on other things. Like that makes sense, and that has empirical basis. We know that things in the world are contingent. So it's not a completely foolish belief, and I'm willing to grant that belief is at least in principle, potentially properly basic. That depends on whether they actually are properly basic foundational beliefs, but that's a different story. But if you did grant the existence of foundational beliefs, I think that belief in a God that does do this, according to the contingency argument, would be a valid belief. I also think that it's valid in terms of properly basicality. And I also think that if you granted the ontological arguments assumptions about existence being a predicate, I don't grant those because I'm a Kantian in that regard. But generally, if you hold the ontological argument that there's this maximally great being, and the property of being maximally great has to include the property of existence, therefore the maximally great being exists. If you think existence is a predicate and you don't take the Kantian view on that, then I think that that's totally properly basic to believe. So I'm not necessarily saying you can't have properly basic beliefs that require God. I'm actually saying you can. I'm just saying that when you specify it as Jesus, which is what you have to do when you say biblical God, you're saying Jesus then, and not just God in general, like these other ones, then you're actually making it much less likely for it to be justified as properly basic. I think if you were to make a more humble claim, like I'm saying you should, like this ontological, not to tell you what to do, but like an ontological argument type of view of God, or the contingency argument, I'd be totally fine with saying, yes, if we believe that foundationalism is true, then that would constitute a potential foundational belief. So I have no problem with saying that God is a foundational belief. I just don't think that you can say Jesus is. So anyway, these are just some of the things. A lot of what he did was question me, and that's totally fine. I don't really have very many questions for him. So if you want to move on, or if you want to discuss
You've
anything.
got 3.5 minutes, Dharma. If you want, you can ask him questions. It won't do any harm. He doesn't bite.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess one thing I had a problem with was how you sort of shrugged off what I was saying about the conception of Jesus. And I think the conception of Jesus is extremely important because what is the claim that is being made here is that Jesus is the biblical God. And there were Christians who doubted that. I mentioned the Ebionites. The Ebionites didn't believe Jesus was a God. They believed he was an angel. And they were early Christians. So I think that to talk about whether Jesus being God is properly basic, I think that has to sweep under the rug all these other conceptions of Jesus, which is fine to do. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying that it makes it difficult to establish as a properly basic belief on that basis. I'm not saying that they're right, and I'm not saying you're right. I'm not saying anyone's right. I'm just saying that properly basic beliefs are such a belief that it's so foundational. But when you have these different conceptions of the same person, it makes it very hard to establish that that is in fact a basic belief that is foundational in that sense. That's all I meant by conceptions of Jesus.
Okay, so Bob, are we into the open discussion now? Hello, Bob.
He's got 2 minutes left. If he wants to yield that, and you two can just talk to each other.
Yeah, no. Well, let me just say one more thing. I think he said at the end of his opening statement, and then I will yield the rest after this. So, he talked about how other atheists like Oppie, and he mentioned a couple other. I don't remember them all, but I wish maybe I wasn't supposed to, but I didn't remember them all. But he said that they were unable to provide a sufficient defeater, I guess, for the belief that the biblical God is probably basic. So that means he's allowed to believe it. So I think this comes down to like a difference in like epistemological approaches. So my belief is that, and I think this is different than his belief. My belief is that all beliefs should be assumed to be wrong unless there's evidence that they're right. So that's my position. That's my doxastic stance toward beliefs. Beliefs are false unless you could show reasons that they're right, or maybe normative beliefs are different than factual beliefs. So for example, a normative belief might be like something is good unless considered, or something is starts as bad unless you can show that it's good. I wouldn't necessarily say that about normative beliefs, but about factual beliefs, I would say that you should assume that a belief is false before, or you should start with assuming that a belief is false, and we go and find the evidence to see if it was true. I think that Gavin's position, and a lot of Christians, I don't know about Gavin in particular, but I know that a lot of Christians, because I've talked to them, do seem to have a view that they should start with the belief that they have unless evidence shows that they're contradicted. I think actually Mike Licona himself did say that on video, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Mike Licona. Dr. Mike Lacona. And I just disagree with that whole foundation. I think that beliefs should not be assumed to be true at all. I think we should be neutral towards all beliefs, basically agnostic, skeptical, until we have evidence that a belief can be justified and that it corresponds to reality and is true. So that's maybe a difference of opinion. Maybe that's where we're going to disagree.
Right. So you two just want to and fro with questions?
Oh, we'll start the back and forth. Bob, just let it run. Just let it run till it's done, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, are you okay with that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Dharmakaya, I just want to give you some evidence that points very strongly to God and why the belief in God is properly basic. So a couple of decades ago, astrophysicists discovered something that they called the holographic principle. You've probably heard about that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So they talk about the universe as a hologram, but they talk about it analogously as a hologram. And no analogy is perfect, but this is how they talk about it. And that it emerges from an underlying information processing. So much of the evidence is pointing to the idea that the universe is emergent. Even space-time is emergent. Atheist physicist Sean Carroll states that space-time is obviously not fundamental. He put the big emphasis on the word obviously not fundamental.
Yeah.
Space-time is something that more or less disappears when you move from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. So space-time, which is what makes up a lot of our universe, is emergent from underlying information processing. Now, as a theist, right, as a Christian theist, this just really bolsters and strengthens the contingency and cosmological arguments. So if the entire space-time, I'll be finished in a minute because I want to get your thoughts on this. So if the entire space-time is emergent itself, and it seems to be, it's got to be emergent from something more fundamental than what we see and what we experience. So there's a lot of apologists and philosophers who are arguing that what space-time is emergent from would be a mind, because the underlying fundamental bedrock level that the universe emerges from could not be material. It has to be something immaterial. And it would have to be spaceless and timeless. So the most likely explanation at the moment would be the same thing you get from other cosmological arguments, that at the foundational level of the universe is an immaterial and necessary mind. I know Professor Donald Hoffman is doing a lot of study, and his research team, they're doing a lot of study into this, because Hoffman is pretty convinced that at the foundational level of the universe is nothing but mind. So those kind of guys, they posit that mind precedes matter. So mind comes first, and then matter comes from mind. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm sure you've heard about it.
Oh yeah, no, I used to be strong into that view, idealism. I would still call myself an idealist, but not in the same way that they would. And I'll delineate that just briefly here. But actually, I said, if you listen to what I said not too long ago, like a few minutes ago, maybe I just talked too fast and you missed it or whatever. But I actually said that I have no problem with the belief that God in general is properly basic. I just have a problem with a particular God being properly basic.
Okay.
So I have no problem even saying that. But having said that, like I said, I don't even believe there are properly basic things. I'm just saying that if we were to assume proper basicality foundationalism, then that would be. No, I think that's that the view of mind being relevant in quantum mechanics and in the universe. I do agree with that, but I don't agree with it in the same way. So this is how my view is going to be a little bit different. So I don't think that the mind being fundamental is necessarily indicative of Christianity, because Taoism says the same thing about the Tao. The Tao is just as well of a candidate if you're going to claim that there's a mind that's fundamental than Christianity. But you don't even have to claim that. So my view is that there isn't anything fundamental. And that's the view held by Carlo Rovelli, who's a great physicist, author. He's talked a lot about the same things that you brought up with John Carroll. You bring up a lot of good people, and I agree with them. I agree that space-time is not fundamental. That at least allegedly, if you go with the materialist or the if you go the ontological realist foundationalist view, that there would be something more fundamental. I just disagree that there is. I think there's nothing fundamental to reality. Reality is just interactions between various properties, and those properties themselves are interactions between finer properties, which ultimately results in what I would call mereological nihilism. There's no fundamental thing that at the core that makes something what it is, and that's what you get down to at the very core. But that's a totally different discussion. But I agree that mind. I can't really deny the fact that there are mind qualities in reality. At least that's how they appear. I just don't think that those things have any substance to them. I reject the notion of substance ontology. I don't think there's any substantial underlying standalone existence to that, despite the fact that there obviously are those things empirically.
Okay. So I've just made a note here. You're not a foundationalist, right? Correct?
No, I'm a strong anti-foundationalist. I'm both ontological and epistemological foundationalism.
Right.
Both.
But in your opening statement, you appealed to foundationalism.
No, because that's what the debate's about. Properly basic beliefs have to do with foundationalism and how we understand foundationalism. So since the debate's about that, I'm talking about it. But I don't personally believe in it. No.
Right. Okay. Now I just want to talk about because we can move on. This is probably going to be a good segue into whether Jesus is or was God. But you said you don't believe that there are properly basic things. Is that right? You don't believe there's properly basic things?
Yeah, I don't accept the notion of foundationalism or proper basicality. No.
Okay. Why is that? Why is that?
I think that the problem that I have with it, for the most part, comes down to I think that most of these types of metaphysical or epistemological positions have to do with an a priori view of certain axioms that we assume and we conclude through reason, and I just don't accept that. So I'm an empiricist full blown, and I reject the notion that there's any justification for a priori deductive arguments or that there's any innate knowledge or that metaphysics is possible. Like I just reject the whole rationalist tradition of philosophy, pretty much.
Okay, well, do you believe that the existence of the universe, this universe, is a properly basic belief?
The existence of the universe is a properly basic belief. Well, you see that is a huge question to ask because there's a lot of assumptions when you're bringing to the table when you're asking that question. So I think that existence isn't a predicate. So when you talk about the existence of the universe, it's sort of like you're saying that the universe has a quality of existing. I just say that existence exists, right? It just is that way. It's just a brute fact. So like I don't think that it's not really a question of whether you believe it or not. It's just the way things are. So I don't even think that it's a coherent, like it's not a coherent way to use a sentence to me linguistically.
No, I can't agree with that. If you maintain a position that there are no properly basic things, we know that a universe exists because we're in it. Now, I can't personally go out there and measure the entire universe and everything in it to prove that it exists, but I have a properly basic belief that it does exist. And
yeah, but what I'm saying is that's just, yeah, I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, if you don't have a properly basic belief that the universe exists, that seems fairly fringe to me. It seems a fairly fringe position.
Well, actually, that's not true. Anti-foundationalism is the mainstream view in philosophy right now that I'm aware of, in both analytic and in continental philosophy. Postmodernism, post-structuralism is pretty common in continental philosophy, and post-analytic philosophy. You have Putnam, you have Rorty, you have Davidson, Quine toward the end of his life. So no, I think that in Wittgenstein, the later Wittgenstein, I think that that's the mainstream view actually. But anyway, doesn't matter whether that's true or not. I'm not even going to get into that. I'm just going to say that what I meant to say was that it's a tautology. To say the universe exists is like to say reality exists, or reality is reality, or existence exists. Like, to me, that's just a tautology. So like, I don't see why it needs to be properly basic. It's just a tautology.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree on that one. It would seem to me that of anything that we know of the external world, that the universe is a properly basic belief. But I would never say the universe is a brute fact, because the universe is contingent on something else. And you also mentioned, I might have got this wrong, but you said, of course, you can have properly basic beliefs without God. You can have properly basic beliefs without God.
Oh yeah.
Is that right? I'm pretty sure you said that.
Many philosophers who are materialists have foundationalist beliefs that I reject. So yeah, absolutely, and they're materialists. So yeah, absolutely, you can have some people who have foundational beliefs that are not theists. Probably most atheists actually in philosophy are probably like that.
Yeah, but how does that square with God? Because your comment was, of course, you can have properly basic beliefs without God.
Well, I'm just saying that God itself is not. God can only. So what I'm saying is, I guess, is that God is one of many in a set of properly basic beliefs. So another properly basic belief you could have is the existence of the external world, or free will, or the self. Right now, I don't think that any of these can be justified as properly basic beliefs, but it doesn't matter what I believe. I'm just saying that some people can have these beliefs. For example, John Searle. I dislike this person immensely, but he's a foundationalist, and he's also what's called a naive realist. He thinks that the world that we see is exactly how it is, right? So basically, what we see, what our eyes see, is basically a perfect mirror of reality. I think that's complete nonsense. But he's one of these people who believes that. And he's an atheist. He's a materialist. So you can definitely be a foundationalist and have foundational beliefs and not have God be one of those. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. So just to be clear, you're not a materialist, right? You're not a physicalist?
No, I'm an anti-foundationalist. So that means I reject that there's even a substance called materiality, just like I reject there's a substance called ideas or mind. I think that there are no substances to reality. I think that notion is false.
All right. Well, you and I are kind of on the same page there, because I'm not a physicalist, and obviously I'm not a materialist as well. But if you reject those things, then how do you account for matter? Where does matter come from?
Right. Well, now I'm going back to idealism again. And I'm not an idealist in the ontological sense, but I am an idealist in the epistemological sense. And what an idealist basically is, what all idealists basically agree on, we talk about Schopenhauer, Hegel, Plato, Plotinus, Kant, F.H. Bradley, all these great idealists all basically agree that the fundamental basis of idealism is that the appearance of reality is not reality in itself. And so that's my position, right? That's how I understand what matter is. Matter is not reality. Matter is how reality appears to us through our perception, but it's not how reality fundamentally is. And if you ask me what is reality fundamentally is, I'd say I have no idea and I have no way of knowing it. And I think that it might be in principle impossible to know. But I'm saying that subjectively, what we see as matter is just how it appears to us through our perception. That's not what it actually is fundamentally.
Sure. So are you more or less on the same page as, say, Dr. Bernardo Kastrup?
No, because with Kastrup, he's not an epistemological idealist, he's an ontological idealist. So he jumps from what we can know, which is the appearance of reality, to what exists, and he says it's consciousness. I think you can't jump to that. I think that is a complete leap that doesn't make any logical sense. And I refuse to jump to that because I I don't like metaphysics in general. I'm a very strong anti-metaphysical type of person. But if you had to pin me down, I would say that I think the best view of metaphysics is not an idealism, but is something like a dual aspect monism, where reality is both aspects of matter and mind. But I would also like to run away from that view because I don't like to ascribe reality as having innate properties either. I'd rather say that it's neutral what reality is, but it has two aspects, mind and matter. So I call my position neutral dual aspect monism, meshing neutral monism and dual aspect monism, because that's what I'm safest saying. But in general, I don't like metaphysics, and in general, I don't like saying these types of things because I just don't think you can justify them.
Sure. So in a nutshell, you're not a fan of metaphysics. You reject metaphysics.
Yeah, no, I'm a strong positivist in my views.
Okay, gotcha. Have you heard? Have you heard of places like in the University of Virginia? They've got a division called the Division of Perceptual Studies. Have you heard anything about these people?
Yep.
Right. Cool.
I don't remember their names, but I know the department. Yeah.
Oh, who's it? Grayson is one of the directors.
Yeah, Grayson
there.
Was one of them. Jim something. I can't remember the last name.
Jim Tucker.
Yep, Tucker. Yep.
Ed Kelly. Ed Kelly's a big guy for metaphysics, or a big believer in metaphysics. But the Division of Perceptual Studies in Virginia, it's not the only place in the world doing these studies. There's I know there's one in Arizona, there's one in Scotland, there's one in Sweden, and I can't remember the other place, but there are kind of few. But anyway, so their task is to investigate basically the paranormal stuff that's outside of our natural realm. And I guess what I'm getting to is that people like Bruce Grayson, Jim Tucker, and Ed Kelly, because of the research they've done, they have a strong belief that it's highly likely that there is life after death. That's their professional opinion based on the research they've done. So what's your thoughts on life after death?
Yeah, the problem that I have is the way that's framed, and that's usually my problems with all philosophical questions is the way they're framed is wrong. I think that life after death is just inevitable because I think that the way that's framed is just false. We don't know what life is. If you ask a biologist to define, a philosopher biologist or biologist to define what's the difference between life and non-life, we have no definitive answer to that question. We also don't know the point at which one dies because the life is chemically the body is chemically the same the very moment you die as it is the very moment before you die. It's chemically the same stuff. So I think that the whole notion of life after death is just a semantic issue. I think life is going to continue after we die. I think life is, my own personal position, I don't like to go into metaphysics, like I said, but I think that if you had to put me in a box, I'd say I'm some sort of panpsychist. I think that life is just embedded in the universe. It's just there. It's like, it's essential to the universe the same way that the stars are essential to the universe or the water. We're all part of the same stuff. So to me, I don't see it as being anything but life.
Yeah, look, I would agree with you. There is something embedded into the universe. I think we'll probably disagree what that is, though. But at least we're on the page where there's something embedded into the universe. So I guess we need to kind of stay on topic. Is belief in the biblical God a properly basic belief? So you said that you couldn't say that belief in the Jesus of the Bible can't be a properly basic belief, or isn't a properly basic belief?
Yeah, no, I don't think any belief about a person who lived in the past, whoever they were, could ever be properly basic. I don't see how that would possibly be the case.
So what are your reasons for saying that?
Well, because the properly basic belief is something more foundational than that. So if you're saying something is properly basic, you mean something like whether the external world exists at all, or whether I myself exist, or whether I have free will, or whether the future is like the past. That's a common one, especially for induction. Like, we need to know that there's some sort of uniformity in nature in order to do things. Otherwise, you couldn't do anything, because you have to assume that the next step you take will be like the last step you take. These are what we call properly basic beliefs because they're so foundational to our lives that if they were gone, what would we do? At least this is the idea of them. Again, I don't really think they exist, but it's a total separate issue. And the belief about a guy who lived thousands of years ago or lived a couple of minutes ago is just not relevant to that at all.
It would be relevant, though, if that guy was both fully human and fully God. Would you grant me that?
Oh boy. Can you repeat the question?
It would be relevant to our discussion, and I just want to say I'm really enjoying the back and forth. It would be relevant to our discussion if that guy, that Jesus Christ of the Bible, was in fact both fully human and fully God at the same time.
To the question of proper basicality, I think that I don't know if it would have an effect on proper basicality. I think it would have an effect on whether, if so, this is how I would say it would. Probably if there was a properly basic belief of God, and you had that belief, and then it turned out there was something that actually corresponded to that belief in reality, like a person actually being a God, then absolutely it would. But that's only if you have that belief to begin with as properly basic.
Okay. Well, would you agree with me that it's a historical fact that the Jesus of the Bible did exist?
Well, I told you I'm a strong mythicist, so no, I wouldn't accept that personally.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. The majority of historians and biblical scholars from both sides of the aisle of the opinion that the Jesus of the Bible did exist and that he was crucified. There are even some atheist scholars, Paul F. Fredrickson, Gerd Ludemann, who's sadly passed away, Michael Golder. They write about Jesus rising from the dead. They don't say that they believe he rose from the dead, but they say something like the disciples of Jesus believed that they saw him alive and well 3 days after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
And even Paula Fredrickson, she says, I don't know what they saw. I wasn't there, but she does say this. But as a historian, I know they must have seen something. They must have seen something. But these are like atheist kind of opinions, you know?
Well, here's the thing. I just actually did do, it was not under this account, but it was under a different account. I just questioned a biblical scholar who is a historicist who was attacking mythicism on this question. And I asked him what his best evidence was for God and for, not for God, for the historicity of Jesus. Now we're getting off topic a little bit, but and he didn't give me anything. The best thing he told me was something that makes absolutely no sense at all, which he talked about Q being the best evidence, the Q gospel. For those of you who don't know, Q is the gospel that was allegedly used by Luke and Matthew that has sayings in there that are not in Mark, but in both Luke and Matthew. But he said that the reason why we know this is because Mark used Q. And that makes no sense at all, because what Q is a gospel that's used by Luke and Matthew, not by Mark. So it just made no sense to me. And that was his best evidence for the existence of Jesus historically, that I heard.
Sure.
I mean, I should go over it again. That was complete nonsense to me. And so, like, that's what I mean when I say that I'm a mythicist. I'm not trying to be a mythicist, but when you have arguments that make no sense like that, I can't really accept that.
Well, look, let's focus on this resurrection for a bit. I know it's not the topic, but it's kind of germane to the topic. So let's focus on that. It would be easy Do you think it would be easy to falsify the resurrection if it didn't happen?
Falsify the resurrection. Oh
yeah,
yeah,
if it was
I mean,
just a made-up story. If it was just a made-up story.
No, I think that I already think that it is falsified. I mean, my own position is from an inductive position. If you assume induction, if you believe in the uniformity of nature, like I do, it's probably the only belief I really hold that's significant. Then the idea of resurrections just does not accord with the regularities we see in nature. Things don't generally rise from the dead. We've not had any existent evidence of that. The only evidence would be people like Jesus or Apollonius of Tyana or Osiris or Inanna. These effectively mythologized people. Those would be the only evidence. Otherwise, you don't have any tallied scientific evidence, especially stuff that's been done under close scrutiny with like scientists and professionals. So I just don't accept that when it comes to resurrection. I don't think it accords with the uniformity of nature. The question says if I believe in Vishnu. I actually used to be a Hindu, but no, I am a Buddhist. I'm a Mahayana Buddhist, so no, I don't. But yeah, if you want to talk about Vaishnavism, we can have that debate too. I like Vaishnavism. I like talking about it. But no,
we could save that for a later debate. But it would seem to me, I can't get on board that the resurrection has been falsified. What makes you think it's been falsified?
Well, like I said, I believe in induction. So the induction principle is the only principle that we really use when it comes to science. And this principle is simply that we look at the regularities of nature. We see that every time we get water from the river, it's water. It doesn't just change magically into mercury, or it doesn't transform into a dragon. So every single time we do something, it has a regularity. Science is about studying those regularities and coming up with a theory, which in science simply means a description or explanation of the regularities that we observe. So we observe things changing in genetic terms and in phenotypical terms, and we call it a theory, and that's what we call the theory of evolution. It's the description of things changing genetically and phenotypically. So all I mean to say when I say that I believe in induction is that I believe that nature generally behaves the same way every single time. I've never once went to the refrigerator and then pulled out a leprechaun, right? I always pull out something that generally goes in the fridge, like grocery store products. So as long as we assume the principle that nature behaves regularly, then resurrection is falsified by that, because we've not had any prior evidence or prior experience in empirical and scientific terms of people rising from the dead.
Sure. Induction isn't the only way that science arrives at a conclusion. They do use adduction, right, as a way of reasoning.
Oh gosh, I don't want to go to abduction. No, I don't accept abduction. Abduction is the best explanation hypothesis. The problem is, to know what the best explanation is, you have to actually have the list of all candidate explanations. So in order to know, if you have 100 explanations for something, you have to know all 100 of them to know that this one is the best one. So in order to know in order to make any abductive argument, you actually have to have all the knowledge necessary in order to make that claim, and no one has all the knowledge necessary. So abduction, I think, is just impossible in principle. So no, I don't think that abduction is used.
Yeah, okay, that's fine, but I can see some big holes appearing. I don't buy this idea that the resurrection has been falsified, and I'll tell you why. Because on that Sunday morning, the tomb was empty. Now, does an empty tomb prove a resurrection occurred? No, but a resurrection sure proves an empty tomb, doesn't it? If the resurrection did occur. So that tomb was empty on Sunday morning. The tomb was in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem at the time was swelling with people because it was Passover. And Jerusalem would have normally been a city of maybe 50 to to 75 odd thousand. But because of Passover, I've read some articles that say it was swelling to like 230,000 people. So it was pretty packed. Also in Jerusalem was the Sanhedrin, where the religious Sadducees, Pharisees, chief priests were, who arranged the kangaroo court for Christ to be strung up and crucified. Now, they had everything in the world to gain from the body of Christ being in that tomb on Sunday morning, but it wasn't. And all they had to do to quash these rumors of the empty tomb and Jesus being seen alive and well was to produce the dead body of Jesus Christ. But they couldn't do that, nor did they issue any kind of religious tome stipulating that these rumors were untrue. They said nothing. They were absolutely silent. And like I said, they had everything to gain by Christ's dead body being in that tomb on the Sunday morning, and their silence was deafening. So then the other thing to consider is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul writes about this resurrection. And 1 Corinthians chapter 15, especially verses 1 to 8, this was pre-Pauline creed, an oral creed that was in wide circulation just a few weeks after the crucifixion. Now, atheist scholars like Michael Goulder and Gerd Ludemann, this is what they say about this pre-Pauline creed of the Apostle Paul. I'll read it just for clarity. It just doesn't take long. So he writes, this is Paul writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, "For what I received, I passed on to you of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," Peter, "and then to the 12, the disciples. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, although some have fallen asleep." When he writes some have fallen asleep, they've passed on, obviously, but most are still living. Then he appeared to James, who was the half-brother of Christ, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me as one abnormally born. So, Gerd Ludemann, Morris Casey, and Michael Goulder are skeptical New Testament scholars. They're not Christians.
Yep, I know them.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. They're quoted saying that this pre-Pauline creed was in wide circulation orally a few weeks after the resurrection, and then was put into writing probably 2 years and no later than 3 years following the crucifixion. So that's kind of a pretty close gap between the event and actually recording the event. The time gap's not very wide. So that gives a lot of credence to the resurrection. And the fact that it's been 2,000 years and there's been no official falsification regarding the resurrection, especially from the enemies of Christ, who had everything to gain. They had so much to gain from proving that his resurrection was false, but the silence from his enemies, like I say, was quite deafening. So I just want to hear what your response about that is.
Yeah. So lots of things there. So I actually talked to Dr. Gary Habermas. I did a super chat to him on the defunct Canadian Catholic channel. I asked him what the sources of the Gospels were, and he agreed basically that all of the sources of the Gospels come down to the Gospel of Mark. So the only source we really have about any of these stories is the Gospel of Mark. So if we assume the Gospel of Mark is right, then we could assume the rest of it. The problem is I don't think that the empty tomb is one of those things. The reason I don't think it is because Gary Habermas himself, as well as many others who have popularized the minimal facts case for the resurrection, have actually removed the empty tomb. Gary Habermas officially removed the empty tomb not too long ago from the minimal facts case. He showed that.
Yeah.
He said that the scholars don't really go back with that anymore.
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And beyond that, Paul himself in 1 Corinthians 15, which I actually always go to 1 Corinthians 15 first because that's the earliest, like you said. It's not the other ones. And Paul actually doesn't have any empty tomb in there. When Paul does talk about the resurrection, and he talks about it in very strange ways, in which I don't think that he means resurrection the way that Christians today mean it. I don't think he had Catholic Orthodox Christianity in mind when he wrote that. Personally, and I'm not going to go into this debate here, but I think Paul was a very Gnostic type of thinker, and I would strongly put him in that family of thought. But I want to talk about the last thing he said, which was the resurrection being falsified. I think it was, and that is the thing with the resurrection being falsified is that it would be falsified if you assume the uniformity of nature. I mean, that's really the only debate here. If you believe that nature is uniform, that it has qualities that are relatively the same over time, then you have to accept that resurrections can't happen, unless you're willing to say that there are changes in the laws of nature. It's similar to the view of Gordon Clark versus Van Til on the laws of logic and God's ability to ground those or not. The question is whether God grounds the laws of logic, whether the laws of logic have power over God. And those are significant questions in Christianity. It's the same thing with the laws of nature. Is God able to destroy the laws of nature, or is God in some way bound by them? It's a good question. It's not really clear what the answer is to that question. I think you said something else. I wish I could remember everything perfectly.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, Goulder. No, I like Goulder. If I wasn't a Marcion priority believer, I would be a fair hypothesis. I think that Q is a juggernaut. I think that's a great article for anyone who's interested in biblical studies. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I just don't view the resurrection as something. Oh, that's another thing you said, that they would have everything to gain by disproving Christianity. I don't think that's true. The evidence that we have for Christianity is extremely little until basically the middle of the 2nd century. We have a huge black hole in evidence before then. I think Christianity was relatively unknown to anybody. It was extremely unknown to anybody. And I don't think that even if Jesus did rise from the dead, most people would be aware of it or care. So I just don't think that that's such a big thing. Anyway, that's okay. Some of the things. I didn't remember everything you said, but hopefully that's
fine. That's fine. That's fine. I can't agree with if Jesus rise from the dead, not many people would know about it because it wouldn't be such a big thing. I think it'd be a huge thing. Now, we need to bear in mind that the entire Bible from start to finish, from when Moses put pen to paper to when John finished Revelation, the time span is about 1,500 years. And in that 1,500 years, there's only nine accounts of resurrections. That means that resurrections are extremely rare. They're extremely rare because God intervenes in the natural course of events to cause a miracle, like a raising from the dead. And I don't see anything wrong with believing that on that Sunday morning, God did intervene into the natural order of things and rose Christ from the dead. And it seems to me that because it's a fact of history that most historians believe, this is not including the Jesus mythicists, most historians believe that the Jesus of the Bible existed. Also, most historians believe that Jesus was crucified. These are historical facts. as far as the resurrection is concerned, of course, the theistic historians are going to believe that. There's a handful of atheist New Testament scholars that believe the disciples believed they saw, and Jesus' followers believed they saw Christ alive and well. So this seems to me to be quite good evidence, and I know God intervening in the natural course of events seems like a huge rip or a tear in the laws of logic, and under normal circumstances it would be. But let's not forget that as a I guess you could call maybe giving us a glimpse of how God thinks, and I'm in no way saying we know how God thinks, because would be impossible. But as far as giving us a glimpse of how God thinks, God created the laws of logic. So because he created the laws of logic, it will be quite easy for him to intervene in the laws of logic and create a miracle such as raising a dead person from being dead. So yeah, that's kind of my response to that.
Yeah, the problem with that is that if you allow God to overthrow the laws of logic in one case, that means knowledge is impossible, because it could be overthrown in any number of cases any time. I mean, if you put that in as a possibility, then you don't have anything after that. That's the problem with the claim that God overturns them.
How can that be a problem when there are still physical miracle events happening today?
Well, that's why it's the problem, because if you're going to say that nature behaves a particular way, and we make our lives dependent on how the nature behaves. In other words, for example, farmers farm because they know that if they farm, they can get water, and the water is going to allow things to grow, and then they're able to harvest and sell it at the market and so on. So they have this regularity. If we say that those regulators can just be thrown away anytime, then farmers can't prep for the harvest. There's nothing they can do.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But I think you may be conflating a little bit where God intervenes in the natural course of things. And you're right. Farmers depend on the laws of nature, and men became scientists in the Enlightenment period because they depended on the laws of nature, because they believed in a lawgiver, right? So they depended on the reliability and the dependability of the laws of nature. But because God, to me it seems, and I've got the figures somewhere, billions of other people on the planet, it seems that because God is the creator, then he's the only one who's able to intervene in the natural order of things. And so I was talking about modern day miracles. Now, again, a miracle is an extremely rare event. That's why they're called miracles. But I can give you just two accounts off the top of my head that there's evidence for Africa that these things happen. One is about a guy called Dwayne Miller. I don't know if you've heard about him, but his vocal cords were beyond repair. They were actually wrecked from a virus, and he wasn't an old guy. He's only about in his 30s or something, but he talked in a really raspy voice because there was so much scar tissue and damage to his vocal cords. And his surgeon said, "Look, we're really sorry, but even if we attempt to try and remedy your vocal cords, we're probably going to do more damage, and you'll lose whatever sound you can make now." So he was kind of consigned to sort of having a life where he spoke in a really raspy, low tone voice. Now there's an audio recording of him preaching a sermon at his local church, and he was talking away in his normal raspy voice, and then slowly the syllables and the words he's talking or he's saying from his voice start to become more clear, you know, like he sounded like he was in the Matrix, and now he's starting to sound more clear. Anyway, he actually stops in his sermon and he says, I don't know what's going on. And the whole church is like just cheering and, you know, clapping and praising God, because now the guy can talk properly. So he goes back to his specialist, and they take scans of his vocal cords, and his vocal cords are completely scar-free, no damage, nothing. And they just said, well, it must be an act of God, or they use a term called spontaneous remission, which is code for act of God. So that's one. This only happened a few years ago. And there's one I can remember of a lady, I'm not sure if she's still alive, I think she is, but her name was Barbara Kaminsky Snyder. Dwayne Miller's miracle happened in the US, and so did Barbara Kaminsky Snyder. Her miracle happened. Now, Barbara Kaminsky Snyder had multiple sclerosis, and she was near death, and her friend's family, husband, put her into a hospice because she was curled up in a fetal position. And she'd been this way for decades. Anyway, there were people from her church at the hospice, and they were praying for her, and she was in this fetal position. And her account is that she audibly heard the voice of Jesus saying, get out of bed and walk. And when she heard that voice, suddenly strength returned to her muscles, her limbs straightened out, and she hopped out of bed, and she was completely healed. And again, her specialists who were saying that she has probably not got long to live were amazed. And again, that is an example of either spontaneous remission, as the medical fraternity would say, or an act of God. So miracles happen, but they're rare. They're rare. That's why they're called miracles.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were Asclepius worshippers who believed themselves to be healed by Asclepius. There were worshippers of Kali who called the Shakta sect of Hinduism, who are able to do great things they call miracles. There's actually a whole Veda called the Atharva Veda about magic and rituals and miracles you can do. In fact, in the early Christian church, there's a whole bunch of magical texts and miracle texts that were uncovered. You can read them in the Princeton University Press anthology called Ancient Christian Magic, where they find ways to charm and manipulate and miraculously affect people. There are also Buddhists who call themselves siddhas who can do various feats. I don't necessarily think that miracles don't happen in some sense, except I think that they can be understood in terms of anthropology of religion, and evolution. I don't think they are some supernatural thing. And if they were supernatural, I guess we would have to figure out how we would differentiate between what is a natural thing and a supernatural thing. We have to find some way to do that. If they actually are supernatural, we'd have to find some way to do that.
Sure. So the doctors of Dwayne Miller and Barbara Kaminsky Snyder had no explanation for the way their patients had healed so quickly. They put it down to spontaneous remission or an act of God. That's all they could say. So, you know, you can make your choice depending on which side of the fence you're on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't want to give too much credit to medical professionals. As much as I'm a believer in science, the fact is that most people who are philosophers and scientists are only so in the field that they study. It's very myopic in their actual knowledge of various fields. People are very specialized in the field that they study. And so I think that it would be wrong to say just because some scientist says this, it means it's true. A scientist who's an expert in that area might have some expertise, but even then, some people can be experts in an area and be horrible at it. For example, I think Chomsky and Jordan Peterson and there are others who I think fit that label. Probably Sam Harris also. So I mean, just because they're scientists doesn't mean that they're right.
Sure.
People can be wrong.
No, I'm with you as far as that's concerned. So okay. Well, I've still got no reason to disbelieve that the resurrection of Christ happened. I understand where you're coming from, absolutely, but it doesn't. For me personally, it's just not persuasive enough, given the eyewitness evidence. And
I mean, I don't. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, given the eyewitness evidence and the fact that it hasn't been falsified, and if it was a hoax, if it was a made-up story, it would have been falsified, and people wouldn't have offered themselves as martyrs and be burned at the stake or crucified if they knew that it was just a made-up story.
Yeah. Well, the thing with the eyewitnesses thing is that most scholars don't really accept that the Gospels are eyewitnesses. You have Richard Bauckham's book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. That's a very common one that says this, but that's the minority view in scholarship. So most scholars don't think the Gospels are eyewitnesses. Most scholars tend to think that there's some sort of oral tradition. So, I mean, I don't really take that to be. But what you said was that...
Yeah. When you say most scholars, are you including Christian scholars as well?
I include mainstream scholars who are on the liberal, skeptical, and conservative sides, and not fundamentalists. If we're talking about fundamentalists, of course, fundamentalists will say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, that's fine. That's fine. I understand. Sorry for interrupting.
If we want, we can have a debate on the Bible too. I mean, I'd like to talk about that too, but that's not really a debate. You said about what was it? The martyrdom thing. So yeah, I mean, the fact is we just don't have very much about early Christian martyrs or early Christians in general. We just don't have very many sources. We can't conclusively know why they died or for what reason, or whether they were given a chance to recant, and we just don't know very much about these people. We do know some of them died, but why did they die? I mean, we don't know if they died because they were making mischief, or maybe someone lied. And you know what happened. It happens not in this country, obviously, but in totalitarian governments. And this was the Roman Empire. It was effectively an authoritarian state. People just lied, and then people went. The secret police went and killed them, and took them away, and they were never seen again. I mean, that could have happened. We just don't know what happened to these people, and that's why I don't really make the claim that they were all martyred. I don't see why we should believe that.
Well, I didn't say they were all martyred. That's a conflation. But we have good historical evidence that many were martyred, and especially during the Neronian era. Nero blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome, and they was mercilessly persecuted. We have reports from people like Polycarp, Ignatius, who were disciples of the Apostle John, who was a disciple of Christ. There's actually a wealth compared to other figures of antiquity, other individuals like Hannibal, Julius Caesar, these kinds of people. The evidence for Christ is huge for somebody who lived 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to disagree with that too much because it's not part of the debate. But I would cite Jesus from Outer Space by Richard Carey. He goes through a lot of these other figures and shows why Jesus' evidence is worse than theirs. As for the martyrdom thing, the Ignatians, you mentioned Ignatius. I'll just mention Ignatius. Ignatius actually is starting to be dated much later because of the strangeness of the Ignatian letters. Most importantly, the Ignatian letters are talking about Ignatius writing these things while he's being dragged from prison to prison, followed by Roman guards, and constantly harassed. That's very unlikely to have happened. It's very unlikely that someone would have written 7 letters to various churches endorsing them and exhorting them to do various things while being imprisoned by the Roman guards. It's very unlikely, which is why many scholars are moving the Ignatians up to like the 3rd century. I recommend looking at that scholarship.
Sure. Okay. Right. Well, do you have any questions for me? Because I've been hammering you with questions.
Well, again, most of the questions haven't been related to debate, and I think I already said my piece on the whole biblical God, proper basic thing, so I don't know if I have to go over that again. So no, I mean, my biggest question, I guess, with Christianity is comes down to, I mean, the fundamental thing, it seems to me, is indeed what Paul says. I don't know if it really is the most important thing, but it's pretty much up there, where Paul says, "Look, if Christ hasn't risen, our faith is of no report. It's vain."
That's right. Yeah.
And it's very strange he says that at the same time as we don't. When Paul says, 500 people saw him, and then the 12, and then then James, John, then lastly it was me. He doesn't preserve any of these documents. I mean, it's very strange that we are supposed to have hundreds of people to see this event. We have almost none of them preserved. And to me, that's just a huge question. Why is it that all of this evidence that was supposed to be there, if all these hundreds of people saw it, you'd think that they would have left a trace, but it's not there. We only have Paul, who himself says in 1 Corinthians 15, he's the last guy. Or he was the last to the party. It was last of all was me. So why do we have only the person who's last to the party, but we don't have all these other hundreds of people who came before it? It's very strange to me. And the only 2 explanations I can get is that either it never happened, it never existed in the first place, or it was destroyed intentionally. And the second one, it would have been destroyed intentionally because it was opposing the Catholic Orthodox doctrine that became the majority view over time. Those are the only 2 explanations I can come to. Otherwise, why wouldn't you preserve hundreds of eyewitness reports signed by people who saw it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, it does to me. Because remember that there were standards. There were standards that an authentic document, authentic religious document, had to meet to make it into the canon of the Bible. And so, for the New Testament, for example, a particular book, say, like I'm looking at 1 Corinthians right now, so a particular book of the Bible, it had to be written by an apostle or a close associate of an apostle, like a menuresis, like a secretary, which would have qualified John Mark to get in. The second thing was that the book had to be revelatory in nature. That's a hard word to say. Revelatory in nature. And the third thing is that the book had to be in wide circulation amongst the church and widely held to be authentic and profitable for preaching and for teaching. So those are kind of the standards that was set for books to make it into the canon.
Oh yeah, no, I know that. I've studied the canon. Yeah, the books had to be Orthodox, Catholic, Apostolic. Right. I know that. But so yeah, they definitely. You're right. I agree 100%. The standards that they have were not modern standards. But so I'm looking at this from a modernist perspective. I'll acknowledge that. Right. So I'm looking at it from a modernist perspective, saying what's the empirical data and evidence, and what's the logical reason. Like I'll admit that. But the ancients didn't have that conception, like you're saying. They thought, well, if it goes back to the apostles, if it's taught by the Catholic Church, as in the whole church, if it's Orthodox, in other words, it agrees with the theology that the church says, right. But those didn't necessarily require having to have some sort of historical, scientific, evidential concept like we have today. And I acknowledge that, but that still becomes a problem. It's a problem for me, but I think it's also a problem for modernity, right? In other words, I think modern people in general have a problem because I think that it goes against our sensibilities. The sociology of modernity is such that we love skepticism. We love being skeptical. And it's easy to see why, because we live in a cosmopolitan world where we have many different ethnic groups, many different religions, many different philosophies, many different cultures, many different ways to live life. And when you have a world which is cosmopolitan like that, with many different ways to exist, it's hard to say that one particular view is the absolute truth above and against all others, which is what the Christian view does say. And so it's just very hard for the modern sensibilities to get behind this, not just me. But no, I acknowledge fully that they definitely had a different criterion of what they considered to be correct than a modern criterion, or the one I'm using, definitely.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. And that is a mistake that a lot of people make when they're looking back, maybe to the first century or beyond, and trying to judge it using today's standard, which is, not that wise. I had something on the tip of my tongue. Oh, it's gone now. Right. So, how long have we been going, Bob? Bob, are you awake?
Yeah, 1 hour,
It's like
40 minutes.
so far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So how long have Dharmakaya and I been talking in this open discussion?
Well, an hour and 40 minutes. I think Dharma wants to go at some point. I don't know. He said 20 minutes, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
unless you want to just have a break. And we can have a break and talk longer, or we can just end it. But yeah, I kind of need to go here soon.
Tea.
Well,
so yeah, go and have a break and come back. 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah, we can do that.
Then we can move into closing statements and Q&A from the audience. Is that possible?
Yeah, of course. It's up to you two. It's your debate. I'll stay here till breakfast.
No, you will, Bob. All right. I'll make a cup of tea.
Yeah. Get the kettle on.
Yep. Thank you.
I hope it's English tea bags you're using.
They are English tea bags, believe it or not, Bob. Yeah. And can you tell me if Dwayne is in the audience?
Well, he was earlier. I don't know if he's still there.
Okay.
He did make a comment earlier. He did turn up.
Right.
Yeah, but that was
the only reason I asked Bob is because
Dwayne, are you still there? Dwayne Burke. Crimson Air, he's here.
Good. So Bob, just to be clear, this open discussion's been going for an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
That's not including the opening statements.
It's including all of it. The stream started at 1 hour 43 minutes ago.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. So it's probably time to wind it up with closing statements and Q&A, because a 2-hour debate, it's quite lengthy. It's quite a long time for people to watch.
There's hardly anyone in the side chat. I think there might be just one in there.
If you want to do your conclusion, I can just take a break. I'll be back here and I can do mine and we can do Q&A.
Sure. Is there any questions, Bob?
No, I don't. Okay. Disappointingly, I suppose, there's nobody in the side chat, really.
All right.
Unlike that first debate that you had on my channel, there was loads of people chiming in.
Yeah.
Now there isn't. I don't know why.
It'll be Thursday in the US.
Yeah.
That could be a reason. People got things to do.
I don't know what time it is over there. It might be about 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, could be.
Mental Approach is there. I don't know if you've come across him before.
Oh, he or she is a good person. She's really stuck up for me with this nonsense. With
yeah,
they've
been to my channel a few times.
Yeah. So I don't know whether mental approaches are male or female, but whatever they are, they're made of the right stuff. So after a bit of a rocky start, it turned out to be a fairly decent debate. What do you think?
I wasn't listening, to be honest, Gavin. I was on Clubhouse.
Oh,
no offense.
Okay.
I've met Buddhists before, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It got me in trouble again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was at Lindholm Jail. I was just walking around the exercise yard Monday morning.
Yeah.
Just minding my own business, you know, and then I thought, oh, I'll just pop in the chapel.
Yeah.
Just go into the library in the vain expectation that I'd find a decent book to read.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of Buddhists in there. So I started witnessing to them.
Yeah.
And then I got banned from going in the chapel on Mondays.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So shall I do a closing statement, Bob?
Yeah, and then when by the time you finish, Dharmakaya will be back.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to make some tea.
I can make my tea and listen while Dharmakaya does his closing. So I'll just do my closing now. All right. So the debate today was whether belief in the biblical God is a properly basic belief. My learned opponent and I could not agree on what the requirements are for a properly basic belief. My opponent cited foundationalism, even though he said he's not a foundationalist, which I thought was a little bit strange. But I cited I actually reject foundationalism in favour of the following four things that are required for a belief to be properly basic. The first one is that the belief has to be logical. Rational. The second one is the belief has to be justified. The third one is the belief has to be warranted. And the fourth one is that your cognitive faculties or your brain has to be not under the influence of any malfunction like drugs, alcohol, or disease or anything like that. So if you have a belief in something and all those boxes are ticked, and a simple example is the existence of the universe. I think everybody on the planet has a properly basic belief about the existence of the universe. But because it's there, you can see it. You can see it. But I'm going to finish off with a really nice quote from physicist Fred Alan Wolf, because this guy's a secular physicist. He's not a Christian, but he is sympathetic to the Christian cause because he states the following. He says, "I would like to explain how quantum mechanics applies to the universe and life that is not being seriously taken into account as much as it should be by any of the neurophysiological models today." And that is the measurement and observer problem. Or if you will, it's the ability by which one can move or change a series of events to occur in such as the next word after this word after that word, which could be the collapsing of the wave function along a given trajectory, which cannot be explained in a classical mechanistic way. Fred Alan Wolf says this is referred to as the quantum Zeno effect. Now that sounds really space age and Star Trekky, but somebody called it the quantum Zeno effect. And it says that if you observe a quantum state a number of times, you can actually alter the path by which that system evolves. So evolution is not an undirected process, but it is a directed process through the measurement and observer effect. And Fred Alan Wolf finishes by saying, now all of this could be a working system in a very materialistic physicalist world, except for one thing. And he says, except for one thing. He says, where is the measurer and the observer? Because wave functions don't collapse without a measurer or an observer, or without the knowledge of a measurer and an observer. So Fred Alan Wolf is asking the question, for all the wave function collapses that occur on this planet, where is the measurer and the observer? So he's kind of alluding to a transcendental type explanation. But that'll be the end of my closing statement. I've really actually enjoyed this. This has been kind of cool. It's something different, and I respect my opponent. He's been cordial, well-mannered. I've had some debates that have not been very pleasant with non-believers, but I think this is going to rank up there with amongst the top three kind of thing. Thank you to everybody in the audience, and thank you, Bob. Really appreciate the fact you're staying up so late. So I'll just hand it over to my learned opponent.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for that closing statement. So my position on this debate being, is belief in the biblical God properly basic, has to do with the definition of what properly basic is as it relates to classical foundationalism. Traditionally, classical foundationalism beliefs like Cartesian doubt having to do with what can be known for certain or what can be incorrigible. Those types of beliefs are what we define generally as properly basic. And the biblical God, as I defined it, was Jesus. I gave a few verses from the Bible as that. And so the question of whether is the biblical God properly basic has to do with the definition of the biblical God vis-a-vis properly basic. And if that is understood properly, the question would properly be framed, is Jesus properly basic? In which case I would say the answer to that question is no. I don't believe anyone who lived in the past or lives in the future could possibly countenance what we call a properly basic belief, at least as it's classically defined. Whether or not properly basic beliefs exist or whether foundationalism is true is a completely different debate, which I'm willing to have, but that's not the debate. And my opponent talked about physics. Actually, I do think that there is something wonky to do with physics, but I don't think that it has anything to do with anything transcendental. I think it just has to do with our own natures rather than a nature of something else. So I think the fact is that I think it comes down to the fact that we are simply not creatures who have some unique insight into reality. I think the classical idea of philosophy that human beings can somehow grasp the nature of truth is just wrong. Human beings are not really that much different than any other organism. So it would be foolish, arrogant, and nonsensical to believe that humans have some unique access to the truth. And that's why quantum mechanics is very much difficult to understand. It's not because of something special, it's because we are not special. It's exactly the opposite reason that Gavin gave. But yeah, but that's basically my position. Thank you for listening. Yeah, there you go.
Is there a question, Bob?
No.
Okay.
No
That's
questions
okay.
in the side chat.
How long have we been going? Bob? Hello, Bob.
Dwayne isn't there.
He's probably asleep. How long have we been going, Bob?
Nearly 2 hours now. 1 hour 55 minutes.
Yeah, that's long enough. That's way long enough for a debate just between two people.
All right. Well, thank you. If we want to debate something
thanks.
else, we can always do that.
Yeah. Let's keep in touch, because I think there's probably a range of topics we could get stuck into.
Oh yeah, there's so many more that I'm much more interested in than this one. If we want to pick one of those, we can do that one. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
All right,
give a
Gavin.
thumbs up, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Thanks, man.
Yep.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bob.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Bob. That was good modding.
Yeah, well, I just kept quiet. That was probably the best way, really.
Yeah. You want to open the room, or do you just want to close it down? Up to you.
Well, we can carry on chatting. I can play me Clouds of Doom. And then
I don't mind carrying on chatting.
Yeah. Live or off air?
It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. It's up to you.
Okay, give us a minute.